Various mainstream media outlets in the UK are now reporting that Deontay Wilder will officially announce his fight with Tyson Fury on Monday, and that the fight is set to take place in November in Las Vegas. Now that all looks pretty likely at the moment, the way things are going. But what's more interesting to me is what Tony Bellew has to say about this Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury fight, and I'll explain why it's so interesting to me in a second. But let me just get to what Tony Bellew has said here. Tony Bellew said, Fury against Wilder would be over in 3 rounds at the most. At the minute, it's a bit of a freak show with Tyson Fury, but to be fair, he has been out of the ring for the best part of 3 years, and he hasn't lived the best lifestyle, so you can't expect to come back into this sport and into this business and take on top competitors. He is definitely not ready for Deontay Wilder. Pianeta is a 6'5", 17.5 stone southpaw. How is that preparing him in any way, shape or form for a 6'7", possibly the biggest puncher in the whole world? So those are the words of Tony Bellew. Now, why am I taking what Bellew says somewhat seriously? Because Bellew has got history when it comes to predicting that a fighter is not what he used to be. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, the David Haye fights. More specifically, the first David Haye fight. Because there were quite a few people who picked Tony Bellew to beat David Haye in the rematch, because Tony Bellew had already beaten David Haye once. And we'd seen David Haye's body give out. But in the first fight, very, very few people picked Tony Bellew to beat David Haye in the first fight. Very few people. The overwhelming majority of people, from the press to the casual fans to the hardcore fans, were picking David Haye to win. Now, there were many of us who knew that David Haye wasn't the same, that he wasn't in his prime. Many of us knew that. But most of us still thought he had enough to defeat Tony Bellew. But Bellew said all along that David Haye's body will break down. Tony Bellew had the inside track on David Haye. Tony Bellew had concrete information from the inside, which absolutely 100% convinced him that David Haye was carrying all sorts of injuries and could not go 12 hard rounds. Bellew knew this. Bellew said this before the fight. He said Haye's body will break down and then I'll take him out. And that's exactly what happened. He was totally confident, not only once the first fight was signed, but even prior to that when he was calling David Haye out. Remember when he fought Ilunga Makabu for the WBC Cruiserweight World title and called David Haye out after the fight? He was very confident for a long time prior to fighting David Haye that he could actually beat him, because he had concrete information that Haye wasn't the same anymore. And he kept on saying it. Tony Bellew is an insider. He is not like us, an outsider looking in. He's an insider. People talk in the gyms. Sometimes fighters share the same surgeons or the same doctors and same physio people, stuff like that. So he had very, very reliable, good information that Haye wasn't the same. And that's why he was so confident, because he even honestly said, look, if it was the David Haye of 2011, 2012 who fought Chisora, I wouldn't beat him. But this current version of David Haye, I'm beating this guy. And it turned out to be the case. Now, with Tyson Fury, is it the same? Does Tony Bellew have the inside track on Tyson Fury? Does he know things about what's going on in the gym? About how he's performing in training and sparring and stuff like that? Does he know certain things? Or is Tony Bellew's head gassed from the David Haye fights? Is he getting a little carried away with himself at this point, Tony Bellew? Who knows? But I do have to take what Tony Bellew says seriously about Tyson Fury not being ready, given his history of accurately predicting the David Haye situation. And again, there are going to be some geniuses in the comment section saying, oh, everyone knew that David Haye wasn't the same. Did you pick Tony Bellew to beat David Haye in the first fight? No, you didn't. Very few people did. Oh, A tiny handful of people did. I know certain people who did in my Facebook group, but they were very, very few. So don't start acting like a genius after the fact. All right? Don't play them games. Bellew had the inside track. Does he have the same with Tyson Fury? You know, Fury has looked fantastic on the pads. He's looked fantastic in his public workouts. His hand speed is very, very good for a big man. Switching southpaw, going back to orthodox, all that kind of stuff looks very impressive on the pads. But there's a difference between hand speed and reflexes. You can have good hand speed, but not necessarily good reflexes. What's the difference? Well, reflexes are when your eyes can detect something and then your body sends a signal. Sorry, your brain sends a signal to your body to react to what your eyes have seen. That's what we're talking about when it comes to reflexes. So if your reflexes have slowed, the process of your eyes taking in the information, then your brain sending a signal to your body to react is slower than normal. Once your hand leaves your chest and your arm extends out to throw a punch, your arm might still move quickly. Your hips might still rotate quickly. But it's what happens before then. It's the reflexes. It's the process of the information traveling from your brain to your body. And when you're talking about high-level professional boxing, the margins of error are fractions of a second. A fraction of a second can make the difference between a punch hitting you in the face and knocking you out or the punch sailing over your shoulder. Yeah, the margins of error are fractions of a second. And we won't know where Tyson Fury's reflexes are at until he gets in the ring with a top-level heavyweight again. We know his hand speed's still good, but where are his reflexes at? And with Tyson Fury's hand speed as well, you know, it all looks very impressive hitting the pads. Hitting the pads is not like hitting an opponent. You don't often see Tyson Fury being able to unload fast combinations like that on an opponent. He certainly couldn't against Vladimir Klitschko. In fact, other than Fury's jab, his punches didn't look very fast against Vladimir Klitschko. His punches actually looked quite cumbersome. When he was trying to throw right hands against Klitschko, they looked quite cumbersome and clumsy. Because an opponent's head is a smaller target than having two pads, which are stationary. You know, your opponent holds the pads up. You can throw shots at the pads. The pads ain't going anywhere. An opponent's head is only one target instead of two like pads. And it's moving. And on top of moving, it's got arms in the way and it's got fists throwing stuff back at you. So it's one thing being able to light up the pads with combinations, a very different thing being able to light up an opponent with combinations. You know, your balance has got to be better lighting up an opponent who's moving around with combinations than it does lighting up some pads. Your accuracy has to be better. Your timing has to be better. I do think that pads are maybe a little bit overrated. I'm not dismissing their effectiveness as a training tool, but this is just a personal thing for me. I've always felt pads are a little overrated and maybe trainers place a little too much emphasis on pad work. And I know Emmanuel Stewart also used to believe this, but this is a conclusion I've come to through personal experience. Okay, but Manny Stewart also used to say that most trainers don't really understand what pad work is really for and what it's there to achieve. So these days, any Joe Blow will set himself up as a trainer and start doing pad work. That's what he thinks being a trainer is all about, holding up pads and doing flashy routines on the pads. When in reality, pads are only a small part of what a trainer needs to be doing, a very small part. And it may surprise some of you guys to know that some of the greatest fighters of all time didn't do pads. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time, he never did any pads for most of his career. No pads at all. And look how successful he was multiple time world champion without ever touching any pads. I mean, you go back to the guys in the 70s, the George Foremans, Muhammad Ali's, and all them kind of guys. How many times did you see them hitting pads? You'd see them hitting the bag, you'd see them shadowboxing, sparring, and all that kind of stuff. But pads weren't really such a big deal back then. But yet the fighters were doing perfectly fine without them, or with minimal pads. So I do think too much emphasis is placed on pads, and sometimes somebody can look electric on the pads, but against an opponent who's moving around, they don't look so electric. And the same thing for a punch bag and all that other kind of stuff. Point being, we shouldn't get too gassed with how a guy looks on the pads. We shouldn't get too impressed. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. So yeah, Tyson Fury, the jury is still out for me in terms of how he's going to do against what. I don't know. There are some people who swear blind, like Bellew, that Tyson Fury is going to get cleaned out. There are other people who say, no, Tyson Fury is maybe not back to his best yet, but he's good enough at the moment to be able to beat a Deontay Wilder. We'll see. One thing I will say in closing is that Tyson Fury is still relatively untested at the highest level. Oh, yes, he is. At the highest level, he's got the Klitschko win, but Klitschko hardly threw any punches at him. And obviously, you've got to give Tyson Fury credit for the fact that Klitschko hardly threw any punches, but there are plenty of other heavyweights who would throw a lot more at Tyson Fury than Klitschko did. Klitschko is a naturally cautious fighter, and he wasn't used to being in a position where he was being outboxed and outreached by an opponent. So he's not used to throwing caution to the wind and taking chances. A lot of other fighters are used to that. They are used to being in that position. They are used to having reach and height disadvantages and having to apply pressure and throw a lot of punches and take shots to land their own. Klitschko's not used to that. So he didn't throw a lot of shots at Fury. We need to see Fury in with a top-level guy who's actually going to throw a lot of shots at him, who's actually going to take chances. Then we'll see how good he really is at elite level. Because he's only got Klitschko at even world level on his resume. He was dropped heavily and looked bad against Steve Cunningham and Nevin Pikage. And although he may have improved technically since those fights, and I put the emphasis on the word may have improved technically since those fights, his chin ain't improved. Vladimir Klitschko never really caught Tyson Fury with full power on the chin. He never did. But one thing I can say is when Vladimir Klitschko started applying pressure against Tyson Fury in the 12th round, he was able to not land clean, full power punches, but he was able to land on Tyson Fury in the 12th round when he started upping his work rate with relative ease. So is Tyson Fury really the Mayweather of the heavyweights? Is he really that slippery? Is he really that difficult to hit? Or has he been in a situation for his last few fights where he's fought either very short guys who are basic in their approach and just can't get close to him, and a Klitschko who just refused to let his hands go? Are those performances against those guys flattering Tyson Fury's defense a little bit? We won't know, as I say, until he gets in there with somebody, an elite level heavyweight, who's actually going to throw some lever at him. Then we'll find out whether Tyson Fury is the real deal or whether he was a one-hit wonder. He might just turn out to be a Michael Spinks at heavyweight, or a Leon Spinks, or a Buster Douglas. He might. Then again, he might turn out to be the second coming of whoever. Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, whoever you want to pick. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this particular video. What do you think about Tony Bellew's comments here? Should his comments be taken seriously because of the fact that he accurately predicted what would happen to David Haye with regards to his body breaking down? Tony Bellew understands what it takes to get yourself fight fit and in shape. He understands how hard it is to come back for being out of shape and the toll it can take on your body, losing weight and all this kind of stuff. Tony Bellew understands these things better than me and you do. He has far more reliable inside information than me and you do. So should we just dismiss what he's saying? This doesn't mean that you should go put your house on what Tony Bellew is saying. He could be wrong. At the end of the day, there is some bias there when it comes to Tony Bellew, right? Because he has wanted to fight Tyson Fury. He's been very adamant about wanting to fight him. But he ain't wanted to fight Deontay Wilder. And we know he's buddies with Eddie Hearn. We know he's buddies with Anthony Joshua. So maybe there's a little animosity there between Bellew and Fury. I don't know. Maybe that's making Fury a little less objective when he's doing his prediction for Fury Wilder. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. But let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this video. How will the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder fight go if it takes place in November? Will it be Deontay Wilder knocking out Fury inside 3 rounds? Are Fury's reflexes just not going to be there? Is Fury just overrated in general? Maybe the Vladimir Klitschko fight flattered him. I know there's still a lot of people who believe that. Whatever the case may be, let me know how you feel in the comment section below. All right? It's happening. I'm out.